Hello, everyone. I'm Gabriela Andaur Gomez, and I would like to welcome you to the International Archives Week 2026 online case study session. We are delighted to have you with us for this dynamic session showcasing innovative projects, practical experiences, and lessons learned from across the profession. I would like now to invite all of our speakers to turn on their cameras so that you can see them. Thank you so much. So our speakers today are part of the International Archives Week 2026 and reflect this year's theme, Archives for Justice. The session today brings together 4 case studies presented by ICA members exploring how archives and records contribute to accountability, truth-seeking, and transitional justice in context of conflict and human rights violations. I would also like to remind you that to make this session more accessible, Zoom's automated closed captions are available. You can activate them at the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen, and select your preferred language for live translation. In regards to the format, each speaker will have 10 minutes to present, followed by a brief moment for questions or comments. Please share your thoughts or questions in the Q&A box as we go along. Thank you again to all the speakers who responded to our call and to the global ICA community for continuing to celebrate and advocate for accessible archives. So now to start, I would like to invite Sofia Nazneen, who will be presenting her presentation called Preserving Voices of Survival, Oral Histories, Gender Memory, and Human Dignity in the Liberation War Museum Archive. Please, Sofia, you can start whenever you want.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Gabriela. Now I'm going to share my screen. So I hope everyone can see the presentation properly. So today I'm going to talk about preserving voices of survival, oral histories, gender memory, and human dignity in the Liberation War Museum Archive. So I want to share that how the Liberation War Museum in Bangladesh has preserved histories, survivor testimonies related to the 1971 Liberation War, and how archives contribute to recognizing marginalized experiences, preserving memories, and supporting human dignity through ethical archival practice. So the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War emerged from a long history of political, linguistic, and cultural divisions following the partition of Bengal in 1947. There, the tension intensified when Bengali leadership won the parliamentary election in 1970. The Pakistani army attacked East Pakistan in March 1971, which has led a widespread conflict. The 9-month war resulted in mass killings, displacement, and widespread gender-based violence. Bangladesh ultimately gained independence on 16th of December 1971 with profound human loss and long-term social consequences. The aftermath also involved contested narratives and partial erasure of certain experiences from official historical accounts, which makes Bangladeshi archival preservation particularly significant. The Liberation War Museum is an independent institution established by 8 people who fought in the war and were concerned about the history was not being preserved or was being erased. The museum is especially focused on engaging students in the history. The Oral History Initiative began in 2001 as part of museum's outreach and community engagement program. A distinctive feature is the involvement of students from grade 7 onwards who are encouraged to collect testimonies from family members and local communities. These oral histories are then documented, preserved, and incorporated in the museum archive. They are also used in publications, exhibitions, research, and educational programs. Through this process, individual memories are transformed into archival records and contribute to collective historical understanding. The program has collected approximately 56,000 accounts, and these testimonies captured lived experiences that are often absent from official records and state archives. The materials are preserved for long-term access and have been published in 11 volumes. This large-scale collection demonstrates how community-based oral history can significantly expand the archival record. It also highlights the role of participatory approaches in shaping public memory and historical understanding. When discussing archives, an important question arises. What happens when lived experiences are not fully represented in official documentation? Alongside the testimonies collected through student-led oral history program, the Liberation War Museum historians and archivists have also documented testimonies from survivors of wartime sexual violence. These testimonies preserve experiences that are absent in the official records. During the 71 war, the Pakistani military and its local collaborators used sexual violence as a weapon of war. Hundreds of thousands of women experienced rape, sexual abuse, and other forms of gender-based violence. Many survivors faced stigma, social exclusion, and profound personal trauma in the aftermath of war. Following the Bangladesh's independence, the Bangladesh government recognized these women as Birangana, meaning war heroines, and pledged to restore their honor and dignity. Various rehabilitation initiatives were introduced, including medical support, vocational training, livelihood assistance, and programs for war babies. However, after the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in 1975 and the subsequent military rule, for years, many of these experiences became marginalized within public discourse and national memory. As a result, significant gaps emerged in the historical record. This is where oral history becomes an essential archival source. Through first-person testimony, survivors are able to narrate their experiences in their own words, transforming personal memory into archival evidence. In later years, renewed recognition emerged, including the formal recognition of Biranganas as freedom fighters in 2015. Throughout this process, the Liberation War Museum's archival collections have contributed to preserving survivor voices, supporting historical research, and promoting greater public recognition of these experiences. Oral histories therefore played a vital role in addressing historical silence, expanding gendered memory, and contributing to recognition, dignity, and collective memory. Against this background of silence and marginalization, the testimony of Ferdowsi Priyobhashini, one of the war heroines, holds a particular significance. She was the first woman to publicly identify herself as a Birangana, breaking long-standing social silence surrounding wartime sexual violence. Although she experienced extreme trauma during the war, she remained silent for 28 years and expressed her memories and resilience through sculpture and artistic practice. Her decision to speak publicly encouraged many others to come forward and became an important moment in shaping public understanding of survivor experiences. The Liberation War Museum preserves a collection of her artworks which reflect the themes of pain, memory, resilience, and dignity. Her story illustrates how archives preserves not only testimonies but also artistic and embodied forms of memory. The preservation of traumatic testimonies requires careful ethical consideration. In oral history practice, Informed consent is not a one-time procedure, but an ongoing ethical process. Participants may choose how their identity is presented, how their testimony is used, and whether any restrictions on access should apply. They may also pause interviews, decline to answer questions, or withdraw at any time they want. These safeguards ensure that participation remains voluntary and respectful. From an archival perspective, these practices address key concerns, including privacy, representation, emotional impact, and long-term preservation. So ultimately, ethical archiving is not only a technical responsibility, but also a commitment to dignity, care, and survivor agency. Immediately after the war, the issue of wartime babies born from rape by the Pakistani soldiers needed to be addressed. Many were rejected by their families and risked even being killed. In 1972, Bangladesh government established an adoption program. The museum's archival work includes records relating to war babies and adoption histories. These collections continue to be consulted by former war babies and their descendants to access documentary evidence, trace places of birth, or understand familial connections. This demonstrates how archives serve not only historical research but also contemporary social and emotional needs. In this sense, the archive becomes a space of recognition, identity, human dignity across generations. So in conclusion, this case study demonstrates that archives are not passive repositories for records. Through oral histories, survivor testimonies, artistic expression, and adoption-related materials, the Liberation War Museum has preserved experiences that might otherwise have remained invisible. So these practices highlight the role of archives in fostering recognition, inclusion, memory, and human dignity. So before welcoming questions, please let me make a quick pitch about my future. Bangladesh needs a seriously professionalized its archives from national to regional to local situations. So my goal is to be leader in this process. Currently, I'm seeking a PhD program related to archives. Any advice that you can give me would be most welcome. Thank you for your consideration and patience. Now I'm ready to welcome any questions from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sofia, for your presentation. I can see already that we have one question in the chat box. So it says, do your transcripts include annotations for emotional pauses? And what was your approach to the preservation and transcription of audio and video files?
Well, first of all, we actually, most of our oral histories that we collected, it's handwritten. So, and for recording, it's before the interview, we introduce the consent form, which has everything that if the participant is agreeing to be recorded, I mean, it's video recorded or being audio recorded and being photographed or not, it depends on their consents that how they want to be recorded. So when if the consent is included everything being photographing, video or audio recording, then we actually listen the audio and we transcribe them by our staffs, I mean designated staffs. It not like to give any other that will violate the confidential requirements or criteria. So the designated staffs, they transcript the audios, and still we show the transcripted version to the participant if any of the part they want to omit or they want to keep. So based on that, we keep the record, and before we took the consent that if they want it to be used only for education purpose or research purpose, or how they want to use these recordings. So in this way we transcribed this. These are actually, it depends from oral histories. We select accounts to public for the publication, for the research purpose, that we are permitted to do. If we are not permitted to do public some the accounts, eyewitnesses accounts or the person who experienced the trauma, we don't do that. It's entirely depend on the person's consent, that how they want the process. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sofia. And we thank you again for your presentation. We will now move on to the next presentation. So I would like to invite James Baldacchino to turn on their camera. And James will present us our presentation titled The Malta Thalidomide Scandal, Restoring Memory and Human Dignity. So James, whenever you can, please share your screen and you can start your presentation.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, ICA, for this opportunity. My name is James, and I'm the administrator of Memoria, which is the oral history project of the National Archives of Malta. Now, Memoria means memory, and this project is all about capturing marginalized voices. And this presentation will focus on the Malta Thalidomide Scandal, and more specifically how archival work can contribute, particularly through the use of oral history, to restoring memory and human dignity. Now, the aim of this presentation is to explore one central question: how can archival practice contribute to restoring memory and human dignity in cases of historical injustice? Now, to address this, I draw on fieldwork carried out as part of the Memoria project, wherein this process is followed. Hidden or silenced histories have been identified and testimonies have been recorded, and the lived or the tangible experience of individuals or communities or different groups have been preserved according to oral history and ethical standards, because at the end of the day, we're dealing with tangible beings, we're dealing with human beings. And these recollections have been made available to researchers and have been used in publications and documentaries. And this project, which started a few years ago, has allowed the National Archives of Malta to become a memory capturing institution. So it's become more proactive rather than just preserving paper documentation. And the Malta Thalidomide Scandal is one such case study which provides a useful lens through which we can examine the relationship between archives, lived experience, and memory. And archives are often perceived as impassive repositories of documents, but through Memoria, as I said, we've taken on a more proactive approach. We're actually dealing and reaching out to communities and groups with a story to tell. And for work on this project, field workers are given academic training in oral history and ethnography. And fieldwork is time-consuming as memory is fluid. Lots of formats have been and continue to be deposited in the project, and in total, Memoria now holds around 12,000 digital items. And the research themes, as you can see, are varied. They've got war, migration, agriculture, transport, to mention a few. But one such theme is disability or disabilities, under which falls the Malta Thalidomide Scandal. Now, what was this thalidomide scandal? But basically, the thalidomide drug was a pill sold over the counter It was introduced in the late 50s. It was widely prescribed to pregnant women to cure morning sickness and insomnia. This was introduced in markets without adequate testing and with limited regulation, and this would pose problems because it caused severe birth defects in at least 10,000 children worldwide, particularly affecting limb development, which we will be seeing. In the US, a particular physician, Frances Kelsey, had blocked American approval of the drug. She was honored and celebrated by the US government. This was during a worldwide scandal. It's been called the biggest anthropogenic medical disaster ever. It affected many countries irrespective of national boundaries, so much so that the drug was recalled in late 1961. However, even though this was recalled in late 61, this drug was dumped in colonial Malta, in the local market, and it continued being distributed 7 years later, in 1968. So unwanted medicinal stock was sold in colonial Malta and in post-colonial Malta as well, so after Malta had achieved independence in 1964. And the country was used as an overseas test center. And we don't know how many families were and how many children were affected. And Maltese victims and survivors were misunderstood and ostracized for decades. And that's where we come in, the National Archives and the Memoria Project, because this scandal links a global medical tragedy to lived experience in the country. These aren't in local documentation. The human factor is missing. In fact, parents were stunned and children were shunned. And there was a level of institutional and societal silence enveloping the whole issue. And when such histories remain untold, those most affected, the victims and the survivors, are excluded twice. First by the original harm, then by the absence of recognition. These were people who basically suffered in silence on the periphery. And oral history matters because it restores human depth to an episode that could otherwise have been reduced to a statistic on a medical document. Oral history fieldwork revealed the emotional, the social, and the practical realities of disability, social stigma, trauma, and resilience. And oral history has shown that historical recovery is a public responsibility, not only just an academic task. And oral history asks who gets remembered, who gets heard, and what justice looks like when recognition arrives late. Now, oral history can be split into two divisions, of evidence and memory and experience and voice. And with regards to oral history, the thing that this methodology gives us is that personal testimony offers evidence unlike institutional records, because it captures how events were felt, understood, and carried forward over time. And it's imbued with emotion as well. And memory is not just a replay of the past, it is fluid. So that's why a lot of fieldwork is needed. Memory is shaped by emotion, later reflection, family context, time, which makes it historically rich as well. It's also a potential minefield. So that's why a lot of fieldwork, a lot of meetings, and a lot of research is needed as well. It is a kind of lived experience as historical knowledge, because care, mobility, stigma, adaptation, and relationships shape impact of historical and personal events. And oral history values the speaker as source and subject. As I said earlier, we're dealing with human beings and human subjects. So ethical considerations are involved as well. And these forms expand evidence. So the Thalidomide Scandal, which happened decades ago, nearly 70 years ago it started, and must be seen through lived consequences. And basically, a historical silence had enveloped this feature of local and international history. There's a significant gap between lived experience and public recognition. In fact, I only discovered this chink in our history just a few years ago when we had to start with fieldwork. Families affected by the thalidomide pill often navigated their experiences privately, with limited visibility, or acknowledgement in official narratives. And there's one interviewee said on record that they were made to live in shame. As a result, their stories remained largely absent from collective memory. This absence is not merely a gap in documentation, it represents also a broader issue of marginalization, wherein certain experiences are not fully integrated into the national historical record. Hopefully, things will start to change. And Memoria, through oral history, is giving victims and survivors a platform, not just to air their grievances, but to tell us of their stories and of how they had suffered in silence for many decades. In fact, fieldwork had started in 2023, so not that long ago, and significant emotions were uncovered. And we did manage to record a number of survivors and victims of this drug. Certain subjects which were uncovered were institutional silence, and so no word from the state or government, blame shifting by the medical sector and the pharmacological sector, and gender bias made an appearance as well, because most of these people said it had to be the women who gave birth to these deformed babies. It was their fault. This obviously led to social exclusion, disability issues, underlying anger, and trauma, which these people are still dealing with. And there was a lot of state inaction for decades. Now, these testimonies by these survivors suggested a long public silence around the drug. Affected families and individuals only started talking about this stuff a few years ago. Someone, a victim, a survivor, reached out. We started carrying out research, and we spoke to these people, and this issue started entering the public sphere through the National Archives centered community engagement. And through Memoria, oral history has helped recover overlooked public memory and has restored dignity to voices marginalized in official narratives. Recent events in local circles have now shown renewed advocacy, including recurring debate over recognition, redress, and compensation for those affected by the scandal. On the right, you can see a selection of the people we interviewed. These aren't all of them. They're nearing their 70s. Some of them are in their 60s. And these people stepped forward to collaborate with Memoria. Because of their brave decision in choosing to speak of their stories and their struggles, they have allowed the archives to continue to be a memory capturing institution. And in giving space to these voices, the National Archives of Malta is not simply restoring memory, but human dignity as well. And that's the end of my presentation, the end of my case study. If you've got any questions, I would be happy to answer them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James, for your presentation. And we will give a few seconds to everyone joining us. Yes, remember that you can share your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box if you can. So let's just give a few seconds to see if we have any questions. In the meantime, may I ask James, have there been any justice processes associated to this case, and have the archives been used in them?
Yes, in fact, when this research team started as part of Memoria, there were talks of recognition from the government side and from the state, and compensation as well. We interviewed at least 8 people now. Hopefully, we will interview more if they would be willing to speak to us. But we have got a very good relationship with the Malta Thalidomide Survivors Association. Most of these survivors are in this group, and because of this fieldwork and because of this project, a lot of momentum gathered, and because of a lot of probing, there were talks of compensation as well. And this year, victims and survivors were supposed to have been compensated as well. And I like to think that the National Archives, through its platform, Memoria, through fieldwork, and through reaching out with this marginalized community, we have helped shed light on these survivors which suffered in the periphery for decades. So even though we're going out there and recording stories about war, migration, agriculture, and trades, we are doing our thing with regards to social policy, even. So we're reaching out and we're helping people who were underrepresented in the historical records, and we're giving a voice to those who were voiceless up until a few years ago.
Thank you so much, James. We thank you again for your very interesting presentation. And we will now move on to the third presentation of today's session. So I would like to invite Rhonda D. Jones. Hi, Rhonda. Rhonda will be presenting what the archives hold, trauma-informed archival practice, and the work of justice. Thank you very much, Rhonda. You can start and share your screen whenever you can.
Okay. Good day. Can everyone see my screen presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you. Good day. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dr. Rhonda Jones, and I'm a public historian and a trauma-informed archivist at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. Today, I want to explore a question that sits at the intersection of archives, memory, and justice. The question is, what responsibilities do archivists have when stewarding records that document violence, trauma, and historical harm? My presentation today is What the Archive Holds, Trauma-Informed Archival Practice and the Work of Justice, which examines how archival practices shape the preservation and interpretation of difficult histories, particularly histories of racial terror, and how trauma-informed approaches can help us engage these records ethically and responsibly. Today, I will focus on four intersected areas: memory studies, trauma-informed archival practices and why it matters, and why archival ethics and relationship between archives and justice. And finally, histories of racial violence, including examples from my research on lynching archives and my project manuscript entitled Blood Money. Together, these themes help us rethink archives not simply as repositories of information, but as active participants in how societies remember, forget, and pursue accountability. Archives are often described as neutral repositories of evidence and historical truth. However, archives are not passive containers. They reflect decisions about what is preserved, what was discarded, and what documented, whose voices were excluded. Many archival materials carry historical value, but they also carry emotional and interpretive weight. More specifically, as my research investigates how archival practices influences preservation, interpretation, and circulation of these histories, I ask how trauma-informed approaches can help archivists engage with these difficult records while acknowledging harm, supporting justice, accountability, and community memory. To understand why trauma-informed practice matters, we first need to think and consider the broader role archives play in shaping memory. This slide summarizes the framework that guides my work. Archivists preserve more than documents. Archives serve as evidence of lives lived, relationships formed, harms experienced, and acts of resistance. The archival ecosystem includes records creators, archivists, researchers, communities, and contributors and descendants. Trauma can affect every stage of this process. The infographic highlights several principles of trauma-informed practice, including safety, collaboration, empowerment, transparency, trustworthiness, and ethical responsiveness. These principles remind us that archival work is not only technical, it's relational. The choices we make influence whose histories are visible and whose histories are understood, and whether archives contribute to healing or perpetrating harm. Why trauma-informed archives? The central question is, how do we preserve and provide access to records of violence without reproducing harm? And so the question becomes equally important when working with records of racial violence, genocide, displacement, and institutional abuse. Several challenges emerge. First, archival silences. Many communities have been excluded from archival documentation altogether. Second, harmful descriptive practices that reflect racist, sexist, and otherwise oppressive language. Third, secondary trauma experienced by archivists, researchers, descendants, and community members who engage repeatedly with traumatic materials. Fourth, unequal representation in collections and institutional narratives. And finally, ethical questions regarding access, privacy, and consent. Trauma-informed practices encourage us to address these challenges intentionally rather than treating them as unavoidable byproducts of archival work. So in 2018, I was the lead archivist for the Burnham Nobles Lynching Archive at the Northeastern University School of Law. And the project was called the Civil Rights Restorative Justice. And it was a law clinic where law students, journalism students, and graduate history students worked on unsolved civil rights cold cases. And this project started about 2000, and they had collected this trove of documents, and they realized we have an archive and we should create an archive. And so I was hired to implement and process and describe this collection. And so at the center, the work was a profound question. Again, how do we preserve these records without reproducing harm? Many of the victims' families had no idea what happened to their relatives. And as law clinics, there's no statute of limitation on murder. And so the perpetrators are still alive, still walking around. We've had so many deathbed confessions. We had a series of things as we were going through, not just collecting documents from the past, but collecting documents from the present. And so we started with a newspaper clipping. And from there, the students worked backwards and forwards to document the person holistically. If they were an enlisted person in the military, they got their enlistment records. We amassed census materials so we could situate them in a place. It wasn't just the date of the death or the heinous way that they were killed, but just trying to recreate these individuals as members of the community, as relatives, as parents, as fathers and sons and daughters, because we did have women in our collection as well as we had children in our collection. So to think about this, we had several challenges. One, as I mentioned, archival silences, where many communities not just were excluded from documenting their story, but they were also threatened physically. So you had the issue of harm, whereas a lot of people thought, to stay silent is to stay alive, and to forget is to survive. And so we were dealing with those repercussions. And then you think about the trauma-informed approach asks us to examine not only what these records tell us, but how they came into existence and what voices are missing. And so when viewed through this lens, it became an archive of justice. And some of the cases were land loss. For example, individuals who had their property taken just illegally. And so there are ongoing issues. A lot of the material is restricted because they are still pending cases. And so to think about what is in our archives, we have death certificates, we have FBI, Department of Justice investigation files, we have photographs, we have newspaper clippings, we have correspondence from the NAACP, police records, court records. And so for our collection, it wasn't so much documenting the actual crime itself, but just in terms of litigation, how far did the case go to trial? Were the perpetrators acquitted or were they sentenced? Also, we had situations where sheriffs and law enforcement officers were complicit in the lynching. And so in our database, you can, triangulate and see how many times does this sheriff's name appear. And so our cases are broken down among states. And so you go into the state and then you go look at the individual's name. So the way you can browse and you can search, many ways that you can find the materials that you're looking for. And we talk about there is no central repository for lynching in the United States. Tuskegee University, they started collecting statistics about lynching. And from there, they used the materials that Ida B. Wells, the journalist, she did some investigations. And then the NAACP did their own series of investigations because they were all trying to get a anti-lynching legislation passed and making lynching a hate crime. And so this went on from the late 1910s all the way through the 1940s. And so the main issue was there was no definition, no concrete definition of what a lynching was. And so whenever, there was a crime committed, some statistics are very conservative and saying, well, this wasn't a lynching. This was just a killing. This was just revenge. This was just someone settling a dispute. And it was not that it was extra legal that someone took the law into their own hands. And so it wasn't until 1940 that there was a uniform definition of what actually a lynching was. So that leads into my research, Blood Money, which is about kinship and compensation, whereas descendants actually realized that they couldn't get justice criminally in the court system. And so they sued civilly. And they sued the sheriffs and the deputies for being complicit. And while their descendant was in custody, that they allowed the mob to come along and abscond the person, that they handed over the keys to the jail cell, that they did not intercept when the lynching, the governor was supposed to call out the National Guard and intercept, the mob that's approaching. And they didn't do that in many cases. And so you have this, again, the evidence of who is responsible for what, and the fact that some people just disappeared in transit, en route, or individuals were deputized and they were from the community and the sheriff would just allow them to capture. And it was just, capture and chasing. And so in many cases, the person did not survive this. And so as my research shows that, again, the compensation, it was nominal considering, it's the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1960s. But the last case in my study is 1981. Michael McDonald was 18 years old and was lynched. And his mother, Mrs. Beulah McDonald, actually sued with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and she bankrupted the Klan. She took all their possessions and all their just, disabled them. And so this was kind of like this idea of what is justice? And so from there, we can talk about how archives preserve difficult histories while centering dignity and care. And again, description, as we're describing these collections, the contextual notes that we're writing, harmful, aware language, transparent in our metadata, that we have access, that communities get to understand and families get to understand what happened. And as we're digitizing this work, we have to think about the sensitivity of, again, it's going to be made accessible to multiple audiences. And so in conclusion, this is just kind of my framework, my methodology, and just identifying sources of harm and contextualizing violent records. And I would just like to close and say archives are not simply repositories of thought. They are repositories of human experience. The choices archivists make influence how histories are remembered while honoring dignity, supporting communities, and advancing justice. As archivists, historians, and memory workers, our responsibility extends beyond preservation. It includes accountability, care, and commitment to ethical engagement with the past. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I will be welcoming any questions that you have, and I thank you for being a captive audience.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for your presentation. I'm seeing lots of reactions from the participants. So I would also like to ask whether you have any questions for Rhonda. Feel free to include them in the Q&A box or in the chat box. But I'm seeing lots of applauses and reactions already. Let's give them a few seconds in case they want to ask you something. I don't see any at the moment. Okay, so maybe I can, oh yes, we have one here. Thank you. So the question is, oh, give me 1 second. Here it is. So have you found any resistance to this project in the current environment regarding history?
Well, it's interesting because we had a number of state officials apologize for the role that law enforcement played in this happening. But you also have to think that it's very political, that these officials are elected and the demographics have changed. For example, Birmingham, Alabama in the 1960s, that was a hotbed of civil rights activity. In the current day, the police chief is African American. So the shift in power has changed. And so an apology from the Department of Police in Birmingham doesn't really hold any weight.
Thank you so much. And one last question, if we can, it will have to be really quick, but we will read it anyway. So how is it like approaching victim survivors? How are they approached? Do they resist? What guidelines did you implement when doing so in this project?
Well, because we are law focused, it really is about accountability. And so we don't get pushback in the sense of, why are we talking about this? People know that the crime has been committed. The silences are what we have to overcome. I mean, there have been families who have been erased, that they have been threatened and they had to leave the South. And, lynching didn't just happen in the South. It happened in the North. It happened in the West. It happened, in many different forms, not just to African Americans, but to Mexican Americans, Native Americans, Chinese Americans. Even white men were lynched as wife beaters. And so the definition of lynching is very fluid. And what we think of the stereotypes of even just nooses and hanging and a rope. But lynching is about, the definition is that it's extra legal, that someone has taken the law into their own hands. And so the murder could be drowning, it could be burning, it could be dismembering, it could be dragging, shooting, stabbing. But the end result is that this person died unlawfully at the hands of someone else.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. We have a final question. I'm not sure if we will have enough time to respond it, but I will read it and maybe you can give us a quick answer or answer also in the chat box. So someone is asking, what kind of safeguarding self-care would you recommend to archivists confronting and working with difficult material? And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, Dr. Rhonda. So
Yes.
if you would like, you can also share a few words.
Well, as I always advocate that, you should approach your supervisor or the person that you're working with, that you need to take some time to process, whether it's going for a walk or massaging each other's hands, just something that you show care. We were very, very close as a group. We were a small group. And so it was very important to understand that there was the weight of what we were experiencing was very overwhelming at times. But because, we are objective about it, that it really is about just how are you caring for yourself? I'm going to get a massage afterwards. I'm going to eat ice cream. I'm going to, just treat myself in a way that I deserve and it's a reward.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now we will move on to the final presentation of today's session. So I would like to invite Gregory Constantine, who will share with us a presentation titled Khaale, Once Upon a Time, The Rohingya, A Visual Restoration. So Gregory, whenever you want, you can share your screen and
Hi,
start your
good afternoon, and I'd just like to thank the ICA for the opportunity to share this work with all the viewers here. And I'd also like to just say it's a privilege to present work alongside Sofia, James, and Rhonda's work today as well. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. I'm a documentary photojournalist, and I've spent the past 20 years photographing the Rohingya community from Burma or from Myanmar. And so this project comes as a bit of a not just a process of challenging historical narratives and visual narratives, but it actually comes as a process of challenging my own work as a photographer. If I asked everyone here to kind of close their eyes for 2 seconds, and while their eyes were closed, I said, what is the image that first comes to your mind when I say the word Rohingya? I'm almost certain that I would know what that image basically looks like, whether it's in color or in black and white, in one variation or another, it would look something like this. Today, nearly all visual representations of the Rohingya portray a people defined by displacement, violence, otherness, persecution, and victimhood. Successive regimes and others have rejected a community self-identifying itself as the Rohingya as belonging to their homeland of Arakan and Burma as a whole. This narrative rejecting the belonging and recognition of the Rohingya, designating them as illegals from Bangladesh, has been widely accepted by the public in Myanmar. And while these regimes have utilized the denial of rights, deprivation of nationality, physical violence, and forced displacement in its persecution and alienation of the Rohingya, the prevailing narrative of Rohingya foreignness continues to serve as a motive and driver for this violence, intolerance, and exclusion. 5 decades of forced migration and displacement, in addition to the physical destruction of documentary heritage, has long dismantled long established ways in which the Rohingya preserve, share, and endorse cultural memory and identity among themselves and with others. As well, it has also limited their ability to confidently, collectively, and effectively contest the claims of foreignness and visual representations that have been posed upon them. The project Khaale, which is the Rohingya expression for once upon a time, focuses on how a politics of memory has actually been an integral part of the strategies of violence against the Rohingya. It also recognizes that in the absence of a visual representation to challenge the existing visual narratives and visual representations dominating public perception, regimes and others will continue to exploit this absence to maintain the violence, otherness, and exclusion of the Rohingya. So it's in this context of visual legacies in the Rohingya. What is absent today is not more images depicting the violence perpetrated against the Rohingya over all these years. Rather, what is absent is a visual translation of who this community was, its history and contributions to Burma, and what it looked like before the decades of violence, exclusion, and othering. Khaale is a collaborative, co-participatory visual project started as a curiosity, an instinct. What kind of visual materials do Rohingya still possess? After decades of mass displacement, after decades of confiscation of all forms of documentation, and after a genocide in 2017 that has forced over 1 million Rohingya to leave their homeland under the most unimaginable violence and conditions. What is out there that Rohingya can use to not just tell people a different narrative, but show them a different narrative? The project started in 2020, and it aims to restore a visualized history of the Rohingya where the photographs and research assembled in this project can then actively participate in shaping a counter-narrative about Rohingya history and this community's placement in Burma's history. This new visualized history can then be used in a reimagining of the statuses forced upon the Rohingya that are currently fixed in public memory. Over the past 5 years, Rohingya around the world have actively contributed visual materials to this project, and these materials have been actually merged with materials from public and private archives sourced and cited. So for a place like Burma, is it not appropriate to ask this question, like it is in a lot of other places? How far back does someone or an entire community of people need to go to prove that they have roots in a place and that they belong? How far back does one actually need to go for others to accept them? In the context of the Rohingya in Burma, is it 1948 at independence? Is it 1824 when the British first colonized Arakan, the homeland of the Rohingya community? Well, unlike other communities in Burma, the Rohingya have been forced and required to go back even further than most others. So we do this through writings of others, through manuscripts and journals establishing the presence of a Muslim community in Arakan predating British colonization of Arakan in 1824, as well as by well over 100 years. We do this through records and journals acknowledging a community called the Rohingya, who spoke a language called Rohingya, through self-contributed materials of family heritage passed from one generation to the next, like this handwritten family tree that dates back all the way to 1868, or a collection of land ownership and taxation documents that date back to the early 1900s. Or this, a land ownership document that's inscribed in a piece of bamboo dating back to 1892. Or more land ownership documents like this one on the far right, which is the oldest material that we were able to find over the past 5 years that dates back to 1881. We have materials that were found in suitcases in the UK that have been sitting for decades in an attic of a family of a former British soldier who fought in Burma during World War II, showing the Rohingya as active participants serving as intelligence operatives for the British in the fight against the Japanese in Burma during World War II, and being formally recognized for that service. On January 4th, 1948, Burma became an independent nation. But in the years leading up to independence, we see through letters Rohingya's active voice speaking about their aspirations for a newly independent nation and their active participation in this process. Of Rohingya being elected to the Constituent Assembly in 1947, to contributing to subcommittees advising on sections and drafts of Burma's first constitution, to Rohingya being elected as members of parliament in 1951 and elections onward. A portfolio of documents that shows the histories of individuals who served as civil servants in the 1950s and 60s, like this gentleman, Ulamia, who became a policeman in 1952. He was highly decorated for his service. Or this gentleman, Taza Mulek, who served as a postman. We were able to find documents that shows Rohingya's active participation in Burma's rich and prestigious academic life during the 1950s and 1960s. Satisfying all the requirements to receive and be issued the first form of national ID in the mid-1950s, just like other nationals throughout the country. We have a collection of dozens of original national registration cards, which were confiscated for most Rohingya in the 1980s. We found materials that show Rohingya using whatever means possible, like every other ethnic minority in Burma, even armed resistance, to stake their claim, demand justice for self-preservation against an increasingly oppressive military regime. And materials that show the Rohingya standing in solidarity with other communities across the country during the demonstrations in 1988. But more importantly, it's a collection of family contributed materials that actually show the Rohingya being human, dignified, part of the development of broader society, sharing rights, voice, opportunity, status, having authorship over community culture and heritage, and having that acknowledged and accepted by others. As a photographer, the family photographs over the past 5 years that have been collected are actually the things that make things universal, that allow us to see the Rohingya as part of a community within the wider world, not as the visuals that have been presented about them by others, including myself. So what has happened and what have we done over the past 5 years outside of creating this archive that has been used to actively speak today, transporting the voices of people from the past into a conversation that is happening today right now about justice related to the Rohingya in a Burma that still is in turmoil. A multilingual website in Burmese and in English was launched about 3.5 years ago, and it has already received over that time well over 70,000 visitors to it, and it continues to develop to this day. And a series of exhibitions have actually been developed that were launched last year. This is an exhibition that took place in Chiang Mai in northern Thailand. Because there's after the coup that took place in 2021, there's an enormous population of Burmese diaspora from other ethnic communities that have come to accept this narrative, that have never been shown anything different, which is the strategic reason for having this exhibition in Chiang Mai. And also a major exhibition that took place last summer in Dhaka, Bangladesh, at BRAC University, which was incredibly successful, with the key audience meant to engage that being students from all the different high schools and universities across Dhaka. I'll end the whole presentation with a passage from an 11-page essay titled Arakan, A Short History. It was written by a Rohingya man, and it was published in issue #1 of the Rohingya-led liberation magazine, Insaf. And here's the passage from the essay. It said, "History upholds the romance of past human experience. It is the mirror of life and measure of its performances. It is through this mirror that others can know of a people who can as well know themselves through this mirror and also guide themselves with propriety. The correct assessment of a people's past determines the pace of its present progress and the pattern of its future activities." And that's the purpose and motivation behind this project at Khaale. Thank you very much for your time. I'll field any questions. And again, it's been a real privilege to present this work alongside Sofia, James, and Rhonda.
Thank you so much, Gregory, for your presentation. We are also seeing the reaction of all the participants. And I think we already have one question here. And others, please feel free to also share your questions. So what steps can archivists take to digitize and preserve these personal archives to ensure a more inclusive history of Myanmar's independence? If there are any other questions, feel free to share them.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of come into this as an accidental archivist. Really, I think I've met dozens of other people who have been doing similar work, who have been almost thrust into this position of working with communities to do this. I think that the main power of the project at Khaale, or one of the primary powers of at Khaale, is that it's actually allowed these materials to be inserted into a conversation that other people from Myanmar are having at this time. That never really existed prior to, I think, this project. And that is a key part, I think, of transitional justice, of collective memory. And I think that for the Rohingya for the hundreds of Rohingya that have contributed material and been involved in this project, I think that it's a huge sense of reward to see that their stories and their history are being inserted into this conversation that's happening in Burma right now.
Thank you so much, Gregory. I think we don't have any more questions, but we are also on time. But I do see some messages thanking all of you for your presentations, and I would like to also join these comments and thank you for these excellent, truly presentations. I believe you have all made us reflect about our work as archivists and about the work that archives can do in preserving and documenting and giving access to these untold stories, and to reflect about how archives, what kind of memory are archives shaping, or memories. So thank you so much again for your presentations. And with this, we will conclude the case study session and today's case studies, this year's case studies for the International Archives Week 2026. So we invite everyone to also check other resources on the ICA website because the International Archives Week has not yet ended. So check out those resources such as the Global Agenda and the Content Hub. And thank you again to all of you for sharing your experiences and for inspiring us. And thank you to all of you who are watching this and for joining us today. So until the next time, and see you soon. Goodbye.